Curiosity tugged at the crowd long before the sun reached its height, drawing farmers, traders, and mercenaries toward the square, where the wooden platform had been raised. The smell of sweat and dust hung heavy, mixed with the acrid sting of iron. Chains clinked as slaves were herded forward, their faces pale beneath the relentless glare. The market, usually filled with the cries of barter and the laughter of children, throbbed with a darker rhythm now, one of power changing hands, of futures bought and broken. At the center of it all stood a girl, her wrists bound, a torn dress clinging to her thin frame. Elena. Her eyes, gray as storm clouds, scanned the faces of the jeering men below. She stood barefoot, her ankles shackled, yet there was a stubborn lift to her chin that betrayed her refusal to bow. The auctioneer called her an omega, spitting the word like a curse, his voice sharp as the crack of a whip. "Fragile stock," he sneered, raking his gaze over her with disdain. "Not worth the trouble unless you fancy breaking her." Laughter erupted, cruel and raucous. Elena closed her eyes briefly, drawing a shaky breath, willing herself not to tremble. The sun burned down, searing her skin. She had once used these hands to mend fevered brows and bleeding wounds, but in this place healing meant nothing. Her gift had marked her as weak, unworthy of freedom. The crowd saw no talent, no value, only a body to own. 10 silver, a burly merchant bellowed, grinning as though she were livestock. 15, came another, his grin wider, teeth yellow against cracked lips. Her heart pounded. Every voice that rose chained her tighter to despair. She heard snatches of mockery. "Too thin to work the fields. A soft thing for the bed. Won't last a winter." Each word bit deeper than the shackles biting her skin. Then a voice rang out, smooth and venomous. Lord Varric stepped forward, his cloak heavy with wolf pelts, his eyes glinting with malice. A nobleman, tall, broad-shouldered, his arrogance dripped like poison. 50 silver, he called, silencing the lesser bidders. The crowd hushed, murmuring approval. Varric's wealth was legend, as was his cruelty. He was known for breaking the wills of slaves until nothing remained but hollow shells. Elena's stomach turned. She tried to keep her chin high, but her throat constricted, breath caught between rage and terror. If he won, there would be no escape, no mercy. The auctioneer grinned, thrilled by the sudden leap in price. 50 silver for the healer girl. Who dares challenge Lord Varric? Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Varric smirked, already certain of victory. Elena's gaze swept the crowd, searching for even a hint of compassion, but found only indifference. She thought of her village, of the faces she had once comforted. No one here saw her worth. She was alone. Then a ripple passed through the crowd, like wind cutting across a wheat field. The air shifted, the laughter died. Heads turned, whispers rising like dry leaves. A figure had entered the square, his presence alone enough to still the noise. The man was tall, armored in black, a cloak of dark fur sweeping behind him. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of his helm, but the sharp line of his jaw, the scar slashing from cheek to chin, marked him unmistakably. King Kalen. Elena's heart faltered. She had heard his name whispered in fear, stories carried like warnings from town to town. The Alpha King, ruler of the northern fortress, said to command beasts with his silence, to tear men apart when angered. He was a figure of nightmares, cold and merciless, never smiling, never soft. Children were hushed with threats of him. Even nobles lowered their eyes in his presence. And now he walked through the square, as though darkness itself made way for him. The auctioneer stumbled over his words. My king, we did not expect." Kalen raised a hand. The man fell silent. The entire crowd held its breath. The king's gaze lifted to the platform. His eyes, pale silver, locked on Elena. Her breath caught. It felt as though the air had been punched from her lungs, as though he saw through flesh and bone, into the secrets she dared not speak. Her hands trembled despite her will. Varric stiffened, his earlier smirk faltering. "My lord," he said, voice oozing false respect. I have already offered. The king did not speak. He merely raised 2 fingers, a signal. The treasurer at his side stepped forward, holding out a heavy pouch that clinked with gold. Far more than 50 silver. Far more than Elena's life had ever been valued. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's eyes widened. Sold, he croaked, too fearful to resist. Varick's face flushed with fury, but he dared not protest. His jaw clenched as he turned away, his cloak snapping like a wounded beast. Elena's shackles were struck free. The iron fell from her wrists with a dull clang. Her arms sagged, skin raw and bruised. For a heartbeat she considered fleeing, running into the crowd, but the weight of Kaelin's gaze held her rooted. One of his men seized her arm, pulling her down from the platform. She stumbled, feet scraping against the dirt, until she was brought before the king. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. The fur lining his cloak carried the scent of smoke and snow, the chill of high mountains clinging to him. His gloved hand brushed hers for the briefest instant as she was thrust forward. A jolt, sharp and burning, coursed through her veins. She gasped, and his eyes narrowed as though he, too, had felt it. Without a word, he turned, striding toward the massive black horse tethered at the edge of the square. She was lifted onto the saddle before him, his arm braced firmly at her side. The crowd parted in silence, heads bowed, eyes averted. Not one dared whisper now. The horse surged forward, hooves striking sparks from the stones. Elena clung to the edge of the saddle, every muscle rigid. Behind them, the town dwindled into dust and shadow. Ahead rose the jagged teeth of the mountains, their peaks veiled in mist. The wind whipped her hair across her face, carried the smell of pine and distant snow. Beneath the steady thunder of hooves, she felt the weight of his silence pressing on her. He did not speak, did not so much as glance at her, yet she felt surrounded by him, trapped in his gravity. The warmth of his body against her back was a barrier and a cage. Her thoughts tangled in panic and disbelief. Why had he bought her? Not for kindness, surely, not for pity. Men like him did not see weakness as worth saving. And yet she was here, drawn away from cruelty into the arms of something far more dangerous. Hours passed beneath a bruised sky. Her legs ached, her lips dry from the cold wind, but still he did not pause. Only when the sun sank behind the peaks did the fortress emerge from the cliffs, a looming silhouette of stone and iron, wolves carved into its gates, torches flickering like watchful eyes. Elena's breath hitched. The stories of this place had painted it as a tomb for the gentle, a crucible for the ruthless. The fortress swallowed light, rising higher than she thought human hands could build. The horse halted before the gates. Guards stiffened, bowing low. Kaelin dismounted, then lifted her down as though she weighed nothing. For an instant, her feet dangled, her face inches from his. She caught the glint of his silver eyes beneath the helm, the faint trace of a scar curving his lower lip. Then her boots touched stone, and he stepped away. The gates creaked open. Inside, the courtyard blazed with torches, shadows stretching across walls that seemed to scrape the stars. Wolves padded silently along the edges, their eyes glimmering gold. Kaelin gestured, and his men dragged her forward. She stumbled, catching herself on cold stone. Her heart raced, her breath misting in the night air. What fate awaited her here? He had bought her, claimed her, taken her from one prison to another. She glanced back once, hoping to read something, anything in his face. But the Alpha King remained as he had been from the moment he appeared, silent, cold, terrifying. And yet, as the fortress doors thundered shut behind her, she could not shake the memory of that brief spark when his hand brushed hers, nor the way his gaze had pierced through the crowd as though she were the only soul alive. Whatever his silence meant, whatever reason had driven him to buy her, it would shape her fate more deeply than chains ever had. The last torch sputtered as a gust swept through the courtyard. Somewhere beyond the walls, a wolf howled, low and haunting. Elena shivered, clutching her arms. And in that sound, in the echo of fangs and shadow, She understood with bone-deep certainty. She had not been rescued. She had been claimed. Curiosity followed her like a shadow as the gates of the mountain fortress thundered shut behind them. The clang reverberated through Elena's chest, final and absolute, as though the last door of freedom had been sealed forever. The courtyard loomed around her, torches throwing restless flames against the towering stone. Wolves padded in and out of the light, their paws silent on the flagstones, their eyes gleaming with a predatory knowing that made her skin crawl. The king's men dismounted, murmuring to one another in low, clipped tones. Not one of them looked at her for more than a heartbeat, and when they did, their gazes slid away quickly, as though fearing her presence was contagious. Only the wolves stared without hesitation. King Kalen stood at the center of it all, unmovable, his fur-lined cloak snapping in the wind. He did not announce her arrival, nor did he acknowledge the courtiers and guards who bowed with heads bent low. His silence was command enough. He gestured once, sharp and brief, and the guards at her side pulled her forward. Elena stumbled over uneven stones, the cold gnawing at her bare feet. The fortress air smelled of smoke and snow, iron and pine resin, a far cry from the dust of the market square. She lifted her eyes, straining to take in the place where she would now be caged. Balconies carved into the rock face jutted above, lit with small fires. Shadows leaned over the rails, nobles, soldiers, attendants, each watching the arrival of their king with a curiosity edged in scorn. "An omega?" one voice whispered. "The king brings us an omega?" The word slithered through the crowd like a snake, hissed with disbelief, tinged with derision. Elena's spine stiffened, though every nerve in her body wanted to curl inward, to hide. She kept her eyes forward, her jaw set. The memory of the auction square burned inside her, her humiliation, her helplessness, the jeering laughter. She refused to give them more satisfaction here. They crossed into a hall so vast her steps echoed. Stone pillars soared to the ceiling, wolf banners draped between them. The air carried the chill of mountain stone despite the fires roaring in the braziers. Here the silence pressed heavier, broken only by the shuffle of boots and the faint pop of burning wood. A woman detached herself from the cluster of nobles gathered near the throne. She was tall, draped in crimson silk that clung to her figure, her hair an intricate crown of dark braids. Lady Seraphine, Elena guessed, from the sharpness of her smile and the way her eyes lingered on Kalen with bold familiarity. "My king," Seraphine said, her voice smooth as velvet yet edged with steel. She dipped into a bow that was more performance than reverence. "What a surprising acquisition you bring us." Her gaze slid to Elena, cold and measuring. One wonders what purpose she could serve in these halls. Elena lowered her head, though her cheeks burned under the weight of so many eyes. She could feel Seraphine's disdain like a knife against her skin. Kalen did not answer. His silence stretched, vast and oppressive, until Seraphine's painted smile faltered at the edges. With a flick of his hand, he dismissed the hall. Courtiers murmured but obeyed, retreating with quick bows and sidelong glances at Elena. Only Seraphine lingered, her gaze bright with hunger for answers, before she, too, swept away with a swirl of crimson silk. The king turned to one of his men. "Take her." His voice, the first Elena had heard since the auction, was deep and resonant, carrying the chill of command. The guard bowed sharply and pulled her down a side passage. His grip was not cruel, but neither was it gentle. The corridor narrowed, shadows pooling between flickering torches. Wolves carved from stone lined the walls, their jaws open in silent howls. They stopped before a wooden door bound with iron. The guard thrust it open and motioned her inside. Elena stepped into a small chamber, dimly lit, a single bed against the wall, a basin in the corner, a shuttered window that let in only a sliver of moonlight. The door slammed shut behind her. For a long moment she stood still, breathing shallowly. Her wrists ached where the shackles had rubbed raw, her feet throbbed with cold, and her heart beat like a frantic bird. She sank onto the bed, drawing her knees to her chest, and stared at the barred window. The fortress pressed in around her. She thought of her village, of children she had healed, of elders who had whispered that kindness was strength. Here, kindness was scorn. Here, strength alone was valued. Her fingers tingled, as though her gift sought release. She pressed her palms together, willing the warmth away. If anyone here saw what she could do, they would call it sorcery. And sorcery was punished with fire. Exhaustion dragged at her, but sleep was restless. She woke to the faintest creak, the brush of cold air against her cheek. The window shutters rattled, and when she turned her head she saw them. Two golden eyes gleaming from the darkness beyond the bars. A wolf, its fur black as midnight, stood watching her. Elena froze, heart hammering. The beast did not move, did not blink. It only watched, patient and unnerving. Then, as if answering some unheard call, it turned and melted into the night. The days that followed passed in strange rhythm. She was left alone in her chamber, meals brought silently, the guards speaking little. Sometimes she glimpsed Seraphine in the corridors, always smiling that sharp smile, always accompanied by murmurs from attendants who made no attempt to hide their disdain. It was in the kitchens that Elena's defiance first surfaced. She had slipped away under the guise of fetching water and found the cooks bustling, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and herbs. A young boy cried softly at the edge of the room, clutching a burned hand. She knelt beside him without thinking, whispering gently as she drew his hand into hers. The burn was angry, blistered, raw. She pressed her palms against it, closing her eyes, willing the warmth inside her to flow outward. The boy gasped, then stilled. When she pulled away, the skin was smooth once more, the pain gone. The kitchen fell silent. Wide eyes stared at her. Fear mingled with awe. Elena rose quickly, heart pounding. "Say nothing," she whispered. "Please." But words spread faster than she imagined. By nightfall, Kalen himself appeared at her chamber door. He entered without knocking, his presence filling the small space. She rose to her feet, hands clasped before her, throat tight. His silver eyes locked on hers, unreadable. "You healed him," he said, voice low, measured. Elena swallowed hard. He was in pain. "I could not." "You risked everything," he cut in, stepping closer. "Do you want them to burn you?" The words lashed her more than any whip could. Yet beneath the sharpness, she thought she heard something else, something like concern. She lifted her chin, though her knees trembled. "If I must risk myself to keep a child from suffering, then so be it." His gaze held hers for a long, heavy moment. Then he turned away, cloak whispering across the stone. Without another word, he left her standing breathless in the silence. The following evening, a feast was held in the great hall. Nobles gathered, their laughter brittle, their eyes hungry. Elena was summoned, dressed in a plain gown that did little to hide her raw wrists. She walked with steady steps, though every whisper, every stare pricked at her like thorns. Seraphine approached with a goblet of wine, her smile sweet and venomous. "You must feel honored," she purred, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "to sit at the king's table. Though one wonders how long such an honor will last for a fragile thing like you." Elena's hands clenched, but before she could speak, Seraphine's wolf, a pale beast with eyes like ice, lunged forward, teeth bared. Gasps rose from the crowd. Elena stumbled back, heart leaping into her throat. Kalen's hand did not move, yet his eyes flared silver. The wolf froze mid-lunge, whimpering, tail tucked, retreating with ears flat against its skull. A silence swept the hall, deeper than before, as nobles stared in shock. Seraphine's smile faltered, her hand tightening on the goblet until wine spilled over the rim. She bowed quickly, retreating, but her eyes burned with fury. Kalen said nothing. He merely returned to his seat, his face carved from stone. Elena's pulse thundered. She sank into her chair, her body trembling, yet her mind whirled with a new question. Why had he shielded her? Why did the most terrifying man in the kingdom choose to protect her, even in silence? That night, as she lay awake, the question gnawed at her. She remembered the brush of his hand, the spark that had passed between them. She remembered the silver flash in his eyes, the way the wolf had cowered without a sound. Outside, a howl rose, long and haunting, carrying across the mountains. She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. Then, through the narrow slit of the window, she saw them again, those same golden eyes, watching from the darkness. But this time she was certain. They were not the eyes of an ordinary wolf. They were the same eyes she had seen flare across the hall, cold and silver, piercing straight through her. And, with a shudder, she understood. It was not only wolves that prowled these halls in the night. Curiosity sharpened to dread the moment Elena heard the clash of steel in the courtyard below. She pressed to the narrow slit of her chamber window, heart racing as shouts carried upward. Torches bobbed like fireflies against the stone, guards rushing to surround a stretcher borne by 4 men. The soldier upon it groaned, his chest dark with blood, each breath shallow, rattling. She should not move. She should not draw attention. Yet her palms burned, her gift straining against the command of her fear. By the time she realized she had opened her door, her feet were already carrying her down the stairwell. The cold stung her bare ankles as she reached the courtyard. The scent of iron was sharp, fresh blood spilling across the snow-dusted stones. Men barked orders, but none knew how to stem the crimson flow from the soldier's side. His eyes rolled, white and desperate. Elena knelt before him without waiting for permission. A guard tried to drag her back, but she shoved him off, voice fierce though trembling. "If you let him bleed, he dies. Let me help." The soldier's lips trembled, a plea unspoken. She pressed her hands to the wound. Heat coursed through her, her body trembling as though a fire had been lit inside her bones. The bleeding slowed. Flesh knit beneath her touch, skin sealing until only a faint scar remained. Gasps broke the night. The guards recoiled, some whispering prayers, others muttering curses. The soldier stared at her as though she were a miracle and a nightmare in one. "Witchcraft," someone hissed. "She's a sorceress." "Burn her," another spat. Elena staggered back, her vision swimming. The cold rushed in where warmth had fled, her strength drained. She searched the crowd for a single kind face, but found only suspicion. Then silence parted the air like a blade. King Kalen stood in the torchlight, his eyes pale silver, his presence eclipsing every voice. He looked at the healed soldier, then at Elena, his expression unreadable. Inside, he ordered, his voice deep, final. The crowd obeyed. The stretcher was lifted, the wounded man carried away alive. The others dispersed, muttering still, but none dared challenge the king. 2 guards seized Elena's arms, dragging her across the stone. Her legs felt weak, but she did not resist. She was thrown into her chamber. The door slammed behind her, the iron lock scraping into place. Moments later it opened again, but this time Kalen entered. He filled the room with his presence, tall and cloaked, his face half in shadow. "You fool," he said, voice low and harsh. Elena forced herself to meet his gaze, though her knees quivered. "Would you have had me watch him die?" His eyes flashed. "Do you want them to burn you?" The words were nearly a growl. He stepped closer, silver gaze searing into her. "Do you want to be dragged to the pyres as they cheer?" Her breath hitched, but she did not look away. "If saving a life condemns me, then so be it. Better to burn with purpose than live doing nothing." His jaw tightened, as though her words struck deeper than he wished to show. For a moment, the silence between them throbbed like a living thing. Then he turned sharply, his cloak swirling, and strode out, slamming the door. Elena sank to the bed, trembling. She pressed her palms together, feeling the lingering heat fading to cold. In the dark she whispered to herself, not sure if it was prayer or defiance. That night, sleep came fitful. Shadows stretched long against the walls, and when she closed her eyes, she was pulled into a vision not her own. Chains rattled in the darkness. She stood in a cavern of stone, the air heavy with musk and blood. Before her loomed a beast, its body massive, for silver streaked with scars. Its eyes glowed the same pale silver as Kalen's, wild and anguished. It roared, shaking the ground, pulling at the chains that bound its limbs. She stumbled back, covering her ears, but the sound was not only rage, it was pain, a cry of torment. The beast threw back its head, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw Kaelin's face within the fury of fangs. Her eyes flew open. She was in her chamber once more, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. The moonlight fell through the window, and she could not shake the feeling that what she had seen was no dream at all. The next day, whispers spread through the fortress. Servants glanced at her and quickly looked away. The word which hissed behind her back. Even the children avoided her shadow. She felt the noose tightening, suspicion wrapping around her throat. By evening, her strength faltered. She sat by the shuttered window, staring at the mountains veiled in mist. Her thoughts circled the vision, the beast, the chains. She wondered if the king knew she had seen it. The door opened without warning. Kaelin stepped in, his face stern, his movements sharp. He carried no crown, no ornament, only the weight of command. "You should not leave this room," he said, his voice clipped. Her breath caught. "You know, don't you? About the beast." His eyes narrowed, silver flashing in the dim light. For a moment, silence stretched taut, a bowstring ready to snap. "You dream too much," he said finally, though the roughness of his tone betrayed him. Elena rose, her voice trembling but steady. "It was not a dream. I saw it. Chained, bleeding, bound by shadows. And its eyes were yours." The air thickened, charged like the sky before a storm. His breath deepened, his chest rising as though he fought something within. He stepped forward until only a breath separated them. "You will forget what you saw," he said, his voice low, almost a plea. Her heart pounded, yet she whispered, "I cannot." For an instant, raw anguish flashed across his face, gone as quickly as it came. He turned, dragging a hand through his hair, the scar along his jaw catching the light. "Leave the soldiers to their wounds," he said, voice hoarse. "Do not touch them again." "And if I do," she pressed. His gaze whipped back to her, fire in his eyes. "Then their fear will destroy you, and I will not stop them." The word struck like a blade. He left before she could answer, the door slamming, the lock falling into place. Elena stood trembling, but beneath her fear, something else stirred, a determination that no threat could silence. That night, sleep dragged her once more into the cavern of chains. The beast thrashed, its eyes silver, its roar echoing like a wound in the earth. Yet this time, as she stepped closer, it stilled. The chains trembled but held. Her hand lifted of its own will. She touched the beast's muzzle, her palm warm against its fur. Its breathing slowed, the fury dimming into sorrow. Then its voice rumbled, not in words but in her bones. "You should not be here." Her breath trembled. "Why are you chained?" The beast's eyes burned with anguish. "Because, without chains, I destroy." The vision shattered. She woke gasping, the night air sharp with cold. Her hand burned as though she had truly touched him. She pressed her palm to her chest, her heart hammering. The truth settled like ice in her veins. The Alpha King was not merely feared for his silence. He carried a curse that bound him, a beast chained within. And now she had touched it. Her chamber felt smaller, the walls pressing in. The fortress beyond hummed with danger, but none greater than the man who ruled it. Yet beneath her fear, a thread of empathy tangled itself around her heart. For behind the king's silence, behind his monstrous power, she had glimpsed something she had not expected. Not cruelty, not indifference. Pain. The torches outside flickered as the wind howled across the mountains. A wolf's cry rose, low and unearthly, carrying the weight of loneliness. Elena shivered, her hand still burning with the echo of the beast's breath. And in that trembling silence, she understood with bone-deep certainty the chains that bound him were breaking. Curiosity gnawed at Elena like a thorn she could not pull free. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the echo of chains rattling in her bones, saw silver eyes blazing out of darkness. She told herself to stay silent, to keep her secret, but silence was a fragile shield. The fortress was not deaf nor blind. Whispers had grown thicker since the night she healed the soldier, servants withdrawing from her shadow, guards muttering prayers as though she carried disease. Yet what unsettled her most was not their fear. It was the king. Kaelin had avoided her since that night, and still, she felt his presence everywhere. She sensed him in the echo of bootsteps across stone, in the hush that fell whenever he entered a room, in the flicker of torchlight that seemed to bow to his shadow. And though he kept his distance, her dreams dragged her back to him. Every vision carried her deeper into the cavern of chains, closer to the beast who bore his eyes. On the third night, she jolted awake to the sound of a key turning in her lock. Her pulse leapt, her hands curling into fists. The door creaked open, and torchlight framed a figure she had come to know too well. Kaelin stepped inside without a word. His expression was grim, but his shoulders carried a strain she had not noticed before, as though each movement weighed too heavily. He closed the door, and the room seemed smaller, the air charged. "You've been dreaming," he said, voice low. Her breath caught. "How do you know?" He stepped closer, the silver of his eyes catching the flame. "Because I feel it when you do." The words silenced her, though her heart thundered in her chest. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "It's real, isn't it? The beast. The chains. You're enough." His tone cut, sharp as steel. He turned from her, pacing once, his cloak brushing the stone. "You've seen too much already. If you speak of it, even once, you condemn us both." His shoulders were tense, his head bowed, as though fighting an unseen battle. Elena took a step forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Then let me help." He laughed, bitter and without mirth. "Help." He faced her again, his expression hard, though pain glimmered beneath. "Do you know what I am? What I've done? The chains hold back more than rage, they hold back ruin." Her voice trembled, yet she did not falter. "I've touched it. I've felt its sorrow. You're not ruined, Kaelin. You're broken." Something in him flinched, a crack in the mask he wore. His breath deepened, his jaw clenched, and for a heartbeat, he looked not like a king nor a beast, but a man starved of hope. Before he could reply, a horn blared from the courtyard below. Both of them stilled, listening as shouts erupted in the night. The fortress stirred with chaos, guards rushing, steel clashing against steel. Kaelin's head snapped toward the window, his eyes narrowing. "Stay here." But Elena moved past him, her feet carrying her to the door. "I can help." He seized her wrist, his grip iron. His voice was thunder. "You will obey." She met his gaze, her pulse racing beneath his hold. "And if I don't? Will you chain me, too?" For a moment, silence burned between them. Then, with a curse, he released her. "Do as you will. But if they see you," his jaw tightened, the words unfinished. He strode out, and she followed. The courtyard was chaos. Torches flared. Arrows whistled. Shadows swarmed against the walls. Raiders had come under cover of night, scaling the cliffs, blades gleaming in the dark. Elena's stomach twisted at the sight of blood flashing across snow, then falling with cries that split the night. Her gift screamed within her. She darted to a fallen guard, pressing her hands to his chest. Heat coursed through her, sealing wounds, drawing breath back into lungs that had faltered. The man gasped alive, his eyes wide with disbelief. Others saw. Whispers rose, but desperation overpowered fear. Soon more wounded were dragged to her side, and she worked until her body shook, her strength bleeding away with every life she saved. Through it all, Kaelin was a storm upon the battlefield. His blade cut like lightning, his presence turning fear to ash. But she saw more than steel. She saw the way his movements grew heavier, as though something inside him pushed against its chains. His roars echoed too deep, too savage, his strikes shuddering with more than human force. And then she saw it. His eyes flashed not silver, but wild white, his teeth bared sharper than a man's should be. For a heartbeat, the beast stared through him, and her breath caught. He faltered, clutching his side, his blade lowering. Shadows pressed closer. Without thought, Elena ran to him, her hands finding his wound. The instant she touched him, fire surged, fiercer than she had ever known. His breath roared against her ear, ragged, trembling on the edge of something monstrous. "Don't," he growled, his voice fractured, almost doubled. "You'll unleash it." But she held fast, pouring everything she had into him. Her vision swam, her strength draining, but the wound closed beneath her touch. His body stilled, his breathing steadied, the wild light dimmed in his eyes. The raiders, seeing their chance gone, fled into the night. The fortress roared with victory, though suspicion flickered as eyes turned toward her. She staggered back, her knees weak, but Kalen caught her before she fell. He lifted her into his arms, his grip unyielding. For a man feared for silence, he spoke nothing as he carried her through the halls. Yet she felt the storm inside him, every heartbeat trembling with restraint. He laid her gently upon her bed, his hand lingering on her wrist longer than it should. His voice was low, rough, with something unspoken. "You've doomed yourself." Her eyes fluttered open, exhaustion heavy. "Or saved you." He froze, staring at her as though she had struck him. Something fierce and wounded burned in his gaze, but before he could speak, she slipped into unconsciousness. When she woke, the room was dim, dawn barely brushing the mountains outside. Her body ached, drained to its core. But more than the ache, she felt it, the bond. Thin but undeniable, a thread weaving from her heart outward, pulling toward him. The door creaked open, and Kalen entered, his face carved from stone. He stood in silence, as though unsure of what to say. Finally, his voice broke the quiet. "You touched the beast. You bound yourself to it." Her breath trembled.
"To you."
He closed his eyes briefly, as if her words pierced deeper than any blade. When he opened them, the silver in his gaze seemed both softer and more dangerous. "You don't know what you've done," he said, his voice raw. She pushed herself upright, though her body protested. "Then tell me. Show me. Stop hiding behind chains." For the first time, his control cracked. He stepped closer, his hand braced against the bedpost, his body tense as though warred within himself. "If you see all of me, you won't stay." Elena's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "Try me." The silence that followed was alive, trembling, a string drawn tight between them. His breath came heavier, his eyes burning with conflict, with hunger, with fear. And then, low and broken, he whispered, "You don't know what I am." But in that moment, she did. She had seen the beast. She had touched its sorrow. And her heart knew, even if her mind trembled. She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing his. For a heartbeat, he let her. His breath shuddered, his control splintering. But then he tore away, retreating toward the door, as though her touch burned. His voice was harsh, almost desperate. "Stay away from me, Elena. For your sake." He left before she could answer, the lock scraping into place. She sat in the silence he left behind, her heart aching, her body trembling. Yet beneath fear, beneath exhaustion, one truth sang clear. The chains he clung to were weakening. And whether by choice or by fate, she was the one unraveling them. Curiosity grew unbearable in the days that followed, as though the very stones of the fortress whispered questions Elena could not silence. Kalen avoided her more fiercely than ever, vanishing into war councils, sparring yards, and shadowed chambers where no one dared follow. And yet, she felt him everywhere, through the thread that now bound them, through the pull of his silence, through the heaviness that weighed in her chest whenever his shadow passed her door. The fortress simmered with unrest. Her healing on the battlefield had spread through the ranks like wildfire. To some, she was a miracle. To others, a curse that would doom them all. Children peeked at her with awe, while old men muttered prayers to ward her off. The air itself seemed split in two, half reverence, half fear, and she was caught trembling in the center. She tried to keep to herself, but the bond made it impossible. When Kalen's anger surged across the halls, her heart thundered with the echo of it. When his nightmare shook him, she woke gasping from dreams of chains rattling against stone. And when he walked near her chamber, her body knew before her ears caught the faint footfalls outside. On the fourth night, the bond dragged her awake in terror. She bolted upright, sweat slick on her skin, her pulse wild. The vision was sharper than any before. The chains had snapped. The beast had broken free. Its roar split the mountain sky, a howl that carried grief and rage together. She saw flames, bodies scattered like shadows across snow, silver eyes burning not with sorrow but destruction. The vision dissolved, and the fortress trembled with a real cry. A horn blared, louder, harsher than before. Shouts erupted outside her door, steel scraping, boots pounding stone. Elena stumbled from her bed, throwing open the door just as a guard rushed past. His face was white with fear. The king, he's losing control. Her blood froze. Without thought, she ran. Down stairwells, through shadowed corridors, into the heart of the fortress, where the great doors had been thrown wide. The courtyard blazed with torchlight, soldiers circling in panic, their weapons drawn not against invaders, but against him. Kalen stood at the center, his chest heaving, his hands clawed into the earth. His body shuddered, warped by power tearing loose from its chains. His eyes glowed with savage white, his teeth lengthened into fangs, his growl reverberating through the ground itself. "Stay back," one soldier shouted, though his spear shook in his grip. Kalen roared, and the sound shattered the night. It was not a man's cry, but the beast's. With a violent motion, his form broke apart, silver fur tearing through skin, muscle reshaping into something vast, monstrous, magnificent. Chains of shadow snapped and fell away, clattering like thunder upon stone. Before them stood the beast Elena had seen in her visions, towering, scarred, eyes glowing with unholy fire. A nightmare. A legend. A king unbound. The soldiers screamed. Some fled. Others hurled spears, arrows streaking through the air. None struck true. The beast swatted them aside with a sweep of its claws, the sheer force toppling men like broken dolls. Elena's body trembled, but her heart carried her forward. She moved through the chaos, her voice rising above the clamor. "Kalen!" The beast's head whipped toward her. For a heartbeat, silence fell. Those silver-white eyes locked onto her, and the world narrowed to nothing but their burning glow. "Elena, no!" a guard shouted, grabbing at her arm. She tore free, stepping closer, her pulse a drum in her ears. "You're not lost," she cried, her voice breaking. "I've seen your sorrow. I've felt your chains. You are not ruin. You are still him." The beast growled, a sound that rattled the walls, but it faltered. Its claws dug into the earth, its breath ragged, its body trembling as though torn between rage and recognition. She took another step. "You are Kalen. You are not alone anymore." The bond between them flared, hot and unyielding. She felt his torment surge through her, centuries of rage, grief, and endless nights bound in silence. It struck like fire, but she did not recoil. She opened herself to it, to him, her gift pouring not through her hands, but through the invisible thread that tied their souls. The beast staggered, roaring as if in pain, its body shuddering. For a terrifying moment, it lunged toward her, teeth bared, and the soldiers screamed as though to witness her death. But instead of striking, the beast collapsed to its knees before her. Its massive head bowed low, chains of shadow dissolving into smoke. Its breath heaved against her, hot and ragged, but its eyes burned less with rage, more with anguish. Elena lifted her hand. Her palm trembled as she laid it against its muzzle, just as she had in the visions. Heat seared her, but beneath it was sorrow, raw and endless. "I see you," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I will not turn away." The beast's breath slowed. Its massive form quivered, then shuddered, shrinking back, bones reshaping, fur receding. In moments, Kalen knelt before her once more, naked and scarred, his body trembling with exhaustion. He looked up at her, his face torn with vulnerability no soldier had ever seen. "You should fear me," he rasped. "I do," she admitted, voice breaking. "But I won't leave you." For a long moment, they stared at each other, the world holding its breath. Around them, the soldiers lowered their weapons, awe and terror mingling in their eyes. None dared move. Kalen struggled to his feet, swaying. Elena stepped closer, slipping beneath his arm, steadying him despite the weight. Together, they faced the fortress, the men, the night still trembling with the echo of what had been unleashed. He raised his head, his voice ragged but commanding. "This is your king. If you fear the beast, then fear it with me. But if you trust," he faltered, his silver eyes softening as they found Elena, "then trust because of her." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some bowed their heads. Others turned away. But no one lifted a weapon. Later, when the courtyard had emptied and the fortress lay still, Kalen sat in his chamber, his hands trembling. Elena stood before him, the firelight painting her face in gold. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Finally, he broke it. "You should have run." Her lips curved, faint but steady. "I was running. Toward you." He stared at her, his chest rising sharply. Then, with a breath that trembled like surrender, he whispered, "You've undone me." Elena stepped closer, reaching for his hand. He did not pull away this time. His fingers curled around hers, calloused and strong, but trembling with the weight of vulnerability. The bond flared, no longer just a thread but a fire weaving them together. And in that fire, she felt not only sorrow and rage, but something gentler, fragile and fierce. Hope. For the first time, Kalen's lips curved, faint and unpracticed. His eyes glistened with something that might have been tears. He bowed his head, pressing her hand to his lips as though to anchor himself to the one thing that had not abandoned him. Elena's heart broke and healed in the same breath. She leaned forward, her voice trembling against his ear. "You're not alone anymore." And though the night outside still howled with wind and wolves, inside the chamber there was quiet, fragile, trembling, but real. Yet even as she held him, a shadow lingered in the back of her mind. She had broken his chains, but chains once shattered did not vanish. They left pieces sharp enough to cut. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his. And in the silence between their breaths, she knew this was not the end of danger. It was only the beginning.